Like his fictitious socio-political work Utopia, Sir Thomas More's life was full of its own contradictions. He was an influential scholar who preferred death over betraying his Catholic faith. He struggled internally with his spirituality, even seriously considering leading an ascetic life in a monastery, to instead becoming one of the most recognized politicians of his time. And he even encouraged his own family members to take the oath approving the Act of Supremacy, so that he was able to see them while he was imprisoned in the Tower of London for denying that very act. Contradictions aside, Sir Thomas More would go down in history for a multitude of his feats, even becoming a recognized saint by the Catholic Church in 1935. Born on the 7th of February 1477 to John More and Agnes Granger, More was able to obtain a reputable education due to the influence of his father, a prominent lawyer who was knighted and eventually made a judge of the King's Bench. More attended St. Anthony's at Threadneedle Street and became a house page to the Archbishop of Canterbury, John Morton, who also served as King Henry VII's Lord Chancellor. This connection to Morton helped More in gaining admittance to Oxford, where he delved into studying Greek and Latin, among other subjects. After 2 years at Oxford, More's father had him return to London so that he could be trained in the ways of the law. While studying at Lincoln's Inn, he was so admired by his instructors that he found himself as a lecturer on law for 3 years. Through all of this, More dealt with an internal struggle between his faith and his profession, culminating with him moving into a Carthusian monastery near Lincoln's Inn so that he could take part in leading a monk's life while still working on his career of law. While this practice only lasted for 3 years, More's attraction to a monastic life stayed with him throughout the rest of his life, as he was known to fast and pray openly while secretly wearing a hair shirt at all times. After leaving the monastery, More married Jane Colt and they had 3 daughters and 1 son. More was resolute that his daughters would have the exact same education as his son, a progressive stance for the time. His wife Jane passed away in 1511, and less than a month later, More married the widow Alice Middleton, obtaining special dispensation from the Catholic Church to do so, and he became the stepfather of her 2 children. Upon his return to practicing law full-time, More found himself moving up the political ladder of England, and he eventually attracted the eye of Cardinal Wolsey, who in 1515 sent More to Bruges to aid in the revision of an Anglo-Flemish commercial treaty. It was during this trip that More began to write Utopia. His work while in Bruges, along with his duties as an undersheriff in London, showed that More was more than capable for royal service. He was first made a privy councillor, and after being knighted was moved to being the under-treasurer of the exchequer. It was during this time that More developed a personal relationship with King Henry VIII, and eventually found himself as the king's personal secretary and advisor. Fast forward to a few years later, and Cardinal Wolsey, now the Lord Chancellor, found himself falling out of favor with the king as he was unable to obtain an annulment for the king from his first marriage to Catherine of Aragon. Upon Wolsey's fallout with the king, More found himself moved up to the position of Lord Chancellor in 1529. Before and during his tenure as Lord Chancellor, More vigorously campaigned against Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation, seeing it as heresy and therefore a threat to the harmony of the church and society. Although the claims are not fully substantiated, More did admit in 1533 that he applied corporal punishment to 2 heretics and was known to have approved of burning those deemed heretics at the stake. Henry VIII's persistence on obtaining an annulment continued, intensified by his desire to marry Anne Boleyn. Eventually, a letter was composed where most of the nobles and prelates of England petitioned the Pope to declare the marriage between Henry and Catherine as unlawful, a letter that More did not sign. Soon thereafter, the clergy of England were coerced into acknowledging Henry as having authority over the Church of England, and it was at this time that More sought resignation from his office of Lord Chancellor.
Thomas.
Your Majesty,
I must tell you, I have received a petition from the members of the House of Commons, complaining of the cruel behavior and abuses of the prelates and the clergy. Thomas, people are asking for freedom from clerical rule.
Your Majesty knows very well that I have always condemned the abuses of the clergy when they've been brought to light. As your Chancellor, I have worked hard to eliminate them and purify our Holy Church.
But
You know where I stand. You've always known. I cannot condone this newfangled vision of private belief and personal grace. For me, the Church is the permanent and living sign of God's presence. It is a visible, palpable community. Not just a few brethren gathered in secret rooms.
Then you will speak against me.
My loyalty and love for your Majesty is so great that I will never say a word against you in public. So help me God.
Although he was initially denied resignation, Henry eventually agreed to it after May 16, 1532, when the Archdiocese of Canterbury sent a document claiming that Henry was officially the head of the spiritual order in England. At this time, Henry began to surround himself with advisors that were anti-Catholic and pro-Protestant, including the sharp politician Thomas Cromwell. Cromwell emphasized the need for More to acknowledge the king as the head of the Church of England, along with his marriage to Anne Boleyn, aware of More's immense appeal throughout England. After refusing to attend the coronation of Boleyn in 1533, More was sucked into a bill of attainder against Elizabeth Barton, also known as the Holy Maid of Kent, who had prophesied against the king's annulment. Although he was brought before the Privy Council in February 1534, the king allowed him to return to his home, but only for a short time. Soon thereafter, the Act of Succession was passed, and More was asked to come forth and acknowledge Anne as Henry's wife, with their future children being legitimate heirs to the English throne. While More was willing to agree to this, he could not agree to a clause that was included, known as the Act of Supremacy, that placed the king above the Pope in matters regarding the Church of England. His inability to recognize this clause led More to being imprisoned within the Tower of London on April 17, 1534. After more than a year of imprisonment and a betrayal by Cromwell's servant, Richard Rich, More was indicted on high treason on July 1, 1535.
You have been found guilty of high treason. The sentence of the court is that you be taken from the court to the Tower of London. Until time and place will be appointed for your execution.
He was originally sentenced to a traitor's death. However, the king, showing mercy, changed the method of execution to a beheading.
I beg you earnestly to pray for the king. Tell him I died his good servant, but God's first.